listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Welcome to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross alongside our GM here at VSiN, Mark Dominik. Mark, it's all over. It does feel a little melancholy on a Monday, right? We're going to talk about all the great things for the Eagle fans and maybe the sad things for the Chiefs fans. But in totality, when you get to this point, the day after the culmination of a season, you know this as an exec after winning the biggest game that there is to win as a member of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. What does that feel like? What does that day after feel like? Because you're one of the few people in the world that know what that feeling is, what the Eagles are feeling today as Super Bowl champions.
It's just kind of one of those emotions that doesn't go away. It just sits with you like, wow, so many players have dreamed of this moment. So many coaches have dreamed of this moment. When you're a little kid, you think about like, what would it be like to win the Super Bowl? And yet you got a chance to do it. And your mind, you get to hold the Lombardi trophy and just kind of look at it and just be like, this is incredible that this actually all came together. This happened. And so today's a day where you start to travel back to your, town, back to Philadelphia. And, it's an enjoyable plane ride. Last night was a fabulous night, I'm sure, for Eagles, everybody within the Eagles family, to be able to celebrate a victory like this, especially, 2 years removed from losing a game that you really felt like you had a chance to win. I joked about this, right? Last week on the GM Shuffle, I called this Rocky 2. I thought this game was Rocky 2. The Eagles won. Just like Sylvester Stallone in Rocky 2, the Eagles won Rocky 2. That's what you and I thought might happen in this game. Did see it going out this way, but it's a great morning. Again, you're slowly getting everybody up, getting them over to the airplane, and you're just relishing in it all. You're looking at New Orleans as a different city. Every time I go to San Diego, I see it from a different lens. Every time the Philadelphia Eagles will step foot in New Orleans, they will never forget this event.
Yeah, it's so cool. And again, 40-22 is the final. You and I both were on the Eagles side. We were both on the over. Took a little bit for that over to get there, but it did eventually get home with a little help from Kansas City. We got all one-way traffic there for the Eagles getting 40. But I think even in the fact that we were on the correct side of the side in total, I think you and I are both still surprised the way it happened, that it was that dominating in fashion, that it was 40-6 and some garbage time touchdowns there for Kansas City to put some cosmetics on it. But I mean, I got to admit, even though I felt like we felt like the Eagles were the better team, I did not see this coming. I mean, they made Patrick Mahomes, and we'll get to the Chiefs looking at, but to the victor go the spoils. That defense and Vic Fangio and the D-line and the linebacking core, you just go down the levels, and Cooper DeJean with the big pick six to really flip that game in the second quarter. I mean, every level of that defense, from linebackers, front four, back four, I mean, Mark, they excelled everywhere. How did Vic Fangio pull that off against Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes?
Yeah, well, they won up front, right? You win in the trenches. As we always say, defenses win championships. I've always been a believer. Offenses can get you the postseason for sure, but a defense still has to get you over the top. And Vic Fangio and company were ready to go over the top. I mean, the beauty here was the fact that he never had to relinquish a corner or a linebacker or a safety to get after Patrick Mahomes. The front four got there. Boom. It allowed him to play a lot more different coverages to kind of continue to, get Patrick Mahomes a little off his game, where he's going to force a ball and Cooper DeJean sees it, reads it, is flowing in the open area and makes a massive play because it's 10-0, right? And turns into 17-0. And, obviously the attack went on before halftime, but, that was a monumental play, I think, for the Eagles just in general to be able to make those type of plays. But this call starts up front with the defensive line. When your 4 can beat the other opponent's 5 or /6 if they're chipping or anything, and you're winning constantly like we saw, when you're putting that much pressure on Patrick Mahomes, when you're sagging Patrick Mahomes 6 times without any blitzing whatsoever, it just allows you to, again, play a lot different coverages, allows guys to roam around. And, they still, at the same point, were able to stop Kansas City from even entering a ground game. Like Kansas City rushed the ball 11 times total. And so really surprising how one-dimensional they made Kansas City, which you'd think that's the dimension you don't want to make Kansas City, is like have Patrick Mahomes beat you. But when you're rushing for getting home with that rush, and let alone 6 sacks, all the pressures, the second interception was one where, Mahomes was getting bumped. And so it threw his body off a little bit and the ball came out wrong at a different angle. And they make a great interception and get another turnover inside the red zone. So this was a team that dominated the defensive line. over their offensive line, and kudos to them. It was a tremendous performance.
Yeah, it really is. And it's well said that when you're only rushing 4, you don't have the running game to nullify that soft box, if you will, that you only have 4 up there in the box. And so they're like, all right, great. If we get home with 4, and then all of a sudden Mahomes going to have a lot more bodies in space that he's not accustomed to, it clearly was a great game plan by Vic Fangio, never blitzing. And I think, Mark, I heard in GenStat times that we live in now, this is only the 4th time in NFL football since they started keeping the sets that there was nary a blitz. Forget about a Super Bowl. In a game, like, you just don't see this. You just don't see a defensive coordinator say, I'll get home with 4, we'll be fine. I'll never blitz, not even show it, and just good luck. And it was a complete domination by Vic Fangio in that defense. Conversely, on the offensive side, Jalen Hurts is the MVP. Cash those tickets at plus 350. You and I talked a lot about Jalen Hurts and that all the focus was going to be on 15, Patrick Mahomes, because he's Patrick Mahomes. Like, I think everybody understands that, and maybe even Jalen does to a degree. But there did seem, we got the sense that maybe not a chip on the shoulder, but a good athletic chip of like, great, keep talking about him. You're going to forget about me. Try to stop Saquon Barkley. Congratulations, you did that. But I'm going to make all the throws -1 where they did get pressure and got a pick on him early in that second quarter. But past that, Jalen Hurts made all the throws that you want a game manager quarterback to make, Mark. And he looked like he flat out went out there and earned that MVP.
Yeah, he did. I mean, I thought it would be hard for either Mahomes or Barkley not to win MVP. But, Barkley got almost 100 yards on the ground and then through the air, but Jalen Hurts got over 70 on the ground. And that, to me, was really the way that they controlled the clock. I mean, you look at the time of possession of this game, almost 38-22. You want to beat Patrick Mahomes, you control the clock. And so they stayed consistent. Once again, Kellen Moore, the running game really wasn't working, but you know what? They ran the ball anyway. They wanted to make sure they were giving up clock and allowing Patrick Mahomes to sit on the sideline going, I can't do anything about this. And so they did a great job of that. I think that was something that was really impressive by the Eagles in the way they came off. And they utilize their strength. What's their strength? Offensive line. And so, again, with the carries that Jalen had, with the amount of touches that Saquon had, that was a really good game plan in terms of how to kind of keep the Chiefs off kilter. And yet, to your point on Jalen Hurts winning the MVP, he did earn it. He threw a gorgeous touchdown. I mean, he threw some nice throws to keep drives alive and to really say, like, when they had to have something, he did it. Jalen Hurts did it, especially, I think, with his feet. He looked really athletic, really smooth, quick twitch. That whole guy that was banged up with concussion and knee doesn't seem like he showed up this Sunday. He was good to go, and they were dialed in. I was in New Orleans for a few days before the Super Bowl, and I heard a lot of stories coming out, and nothing wrong or right on either way. Kansas City has a different way of doing things. Most of what I was hearing out of Kansas City is by 4:30, 5 o'clock, they had freedom, where the Eagles were just shut down. It was there's no joking, there's no anything. We're in at 7, we're out at 8. It was a very tight ship, and I think that kind of rolled into the game a little bit. And again, I don't have anything against Kansas City handle it the way they do. They obviously deserve either. They've been multiple times, but you could see. I just think that they took it so intenseful, and I think Jalen Hurts performed so well in the biggest game to earn that MVP.
It did have there were some people are making the comparison of the last time the Chiefs got blown out in the Super Bowl with Mahomes was against the Buccaneers, but it did have more of that Peyton Manning when they had that number 1 office in Denver many moons ago against Seattle and that Legion of Boom defense. And that defense just came out and made a statement right away and put Peyton Manning on their heels, and they never recovered from that opening play safety. And it felt like similar to that, right? Like, once you put Mahomes on his heels, even in the Tampa Bay game, you don't remember seeing Mahomes look so flustered and so out of his skin. And that is a credit, as you mentioned, to the game plan of Vic Fangio. But also Nick Serianni. How much credit do we have to give Serianni? I say that, by the way, not like how much credit do we have to give Serianni. I say like we got to, America, give credit to Nick Serianni, because it feels like a guy nobody wants to give credit to. I do, because I look at it and I know you do too. I look at it like, man, you get 2 different staffs, not just to a Super Bowl like you did 2 years ago, but now you win the Super Bowl in convincing fashion. At some point, do we have to realize, hey, Nick Serianni knows what he's doing?
Yeah, he knows how to get to his players, right? He shows you see the passion he has. He's always said he's an emotional guy too. And sometimes when players know how much you care for them, it really brings a lot more out of them. Like, they want to get better as players, clearly. Like, if you don't, like Vic Fangio, obviously he was making those players better on defense, and they responded. Nick Serianni now tries to make them better, but he cares about them, and they know that, right? You go to Saquon Barkley and say, hey, look, at the end of this game, you want to go for a rushing record in terms of a single season? He's like, no, I'm good. I'll let those guys eat a little bit. Like, that just shows you that Nick Serianni cares about what he's thinking, the player, instead of like, oh, yeah, we got a chance to do something special and amazing. Maybe I should go check the player and see what he's saying. I think that's a really great thing about Serianni. And I know he's been up against the gun, 2-2, and everybody's like, I don't know about this guy. Everybody kept waiting for the fall. But never happened this year. They stayed on a streak. Two things I think are really worth pointing out. Number one, we'll take Jalen Hurts, take his Super Bowl stats for 2 Super Bowls. You'd be hard-pressed to have a lot of people find those kind of numbers across the board. So when you're asking about a guy who can handle the big game and respond, I don't know who wants to play Jalen Hurts in the Super Bowl again. I just don't. It's 2 times in a row that he could have been MVP, both of them, right?
Absolutely.
And the other thing, and the other thing about the Eagles was their defense. You talked about it a little bit, Vic Fangio. They were plus 12 in turnover differential during the postseason. Plus 12. That is an incredible. The next closest team was the Buffalo Bills with only plus 4. So that showed you how dominant they were in terms of getting the ball back to their offense and being productive.
4 games plus 12, you're getting 3 extra in a game. We talk about it all the time. This is why coaches harp on this stuff. And I know people are like, oh, yeah, turnovers, we get it. No, do you get it? Because the Eagles got it, and that's why they're Super Bowl champions today. Great point. I remember Saquon Barkley, I believe, said last night that Serianni kept saying, you can't be great without the greatness of others. And he kept saying, like Coach said. So you talk about getting to your players. When I hear that, that means that message, that repetitive message, was getting through to the Saquon Barkleys, the Jalen Hurts of the world. It's not all about me. I need everybody. We all got to be great, because I can't individually be great if the guys up front aren't great, defense isn't great, and just carried on. And they certainly were great when they had to be in that 40-22 win. Not so great for the Chiefs. We'll take a look at what went wrong for Kansas City next here on the GM Show.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
We continue the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross alongside Mark Dominik here. We talked about the victor, go the spoils. Philadelphia, congratulations, a 2nd world championship. Not that long of a span. Different head coaches, different quarterbacks. They get it done. Same coach, same quarterback in Kansas City. Tons of success. 5 Super Bowl appearances, but they are 3-2 now after failing to become the first team ever to get that elusive three-peat in the history of the Super Bowl era of NFL football. Andy Mahomes, you couldn't just make them Andy Mahomes. Andy Reid didn't seem like it really bothered him, the talk of the three-peat. He downplayed it all week. I know the players probably were thinking of that. Patrick Mahomes was. He said it last year to beat San Francisco. He went right up to Chris Jones on the field and said, hey, we're going for a three-peat. You're not going anywhere, big fella. What now of the Chiefs? Was it just a bad day to have a bad day? Or are there bigger issues that might come to the surface? I mean, you play 3 straight years, the most games of anybody in the NFL. Mark, I worry that if you don't flip over some things in the roster, sometimes all that gameplay could wear you out in the 4th year.
Yeah, I mean, I think a few things when I think through this game, obviously the offensive line, they've been working on trying to draft players for the offensive line, and some of the guys just haven't been able to step into those roles where they've been drafted for it. So you have to kick Joe Thuney out to the left tackle, and both tackles had a hard time. Interior had a hard time. I mean, look, that's why they were able to win. It was just like they were getting pressure from whichever way they wanted to rush, and so it was a very frustrating game for Kansas City across the board. Look, think of it this way. For George Karlaftis, Trent McDuffie, Jalen Watson, they've never ended a season on the loss. It's never happened.
Right.
For 3 straight. I mean, this is the first time they've ever what's that feel like? So it's a weird situation for Kansas City. It's one of those ones where the way they lost, with the score being 40-6, you go through a lot of emotions on the field. There's a lot of times you take a loss right to the locker room because it happens instantaneously. Right at the last, a field goal's made, score a touchdown, or a touchdown gets scored against you, and your emotions are all over you. It's a really hard place to be. This one was, you looked in the fourth quarter, and although, Kansas City put some touchdowns on the board late, they were already processing this all the way through the fourth quarter. So it was an hour for them just kind of sit there and go, this is happening. Like, we're losing this game. And I think that's a really hard place to be at when you look at the Kansas City Chiefs, since they're so, so unfamiliar this entire season when they're all these one. Kansas City, clearly, they have some things. I think they've got to find a running back that is somebody that they can really, hand the ball off and say, you've got 20 carries this game and hopefully some catches. I think they need that guy, whether it's the James Cook, the Josh Johnson, certainly the Derrick Henrys, all these guys, right? Saquon Barkley's. I mean, it's easy to sit here and say that, but clearly that's something they need. They need to be able to lean on that. And then I think they've obviously got to get one more pass rusher, I think is a really critical piece to this team. I mean, the nice thing about Kansas City is it's not a big overhaul. The big thing, I think their big free agent decision this offseason is going to be Trey Smith. And what do they do with their guard? Can they afford to keep him and pay him? Because he's probably going to get $20 million a year, or roughly about that number. So that is a big one for them to have to deal with and see what they can do. But I think it's fixable. Again, I think what we saw in Kansas City all season long was a lot of tight ball games where they knew how to win. When they lost a turnover margin like they did in this game, with a team that's, going to take advantage of every one of them, it just put them in a big hole.
It's interesting perspective, Mark, that like they had to sit with it almost through the majority. Like, I tweeted out kind of tongue in cheek at halftime, game over. I did think the game was over, but you never quite feel like the game's over as long as 15's on that other sideline. But yet even, you're seeing as the clock's bleeding away in the third quarter, the cutaways of Mahomes sitting there stewing in it to that point. He already put out a tweet thanking Kansas City crowd, took onus for it, said, I got to be better. I wasn't good enough. I let you down. We will be back. That was the last line he put in there. I know some people in America want to write the Chiefs off now and say, all right, we saw your window was up. It was a great 3 years, but it's over. New blood, Buffalo, Cincinnati, you name it. Baltimore. Is it over for them? Or do you think, like you said, there are fixable things that the front office can do? Andy Reid, I don't know that we're ever going to doubt Andy Reid again with his run in Kansas City. Is it fixable that Patrick Mahomes should say we will be back?
Yeah, I think it is fixable. I think at least, look, what they've done so far, 7 AFC championships, seems outrageous, right? And to think that they could be at 8, but it's hard for me not to put them at 8. Like the Denver Broncos certainly closed the gap. The Chargers, feel like they've definitely closed the gap.
Yes.
Both those teams have fixable things that you could do offensively. I think they're both, situations where you can add a couple little pieces and they'll be even more explosive offensively than they were last year. So that's a concern for Kansas City. But at the same point, as I said, if they can get Kelsey to come back in shape, which, if he wants to play again, that's it. That's a big piece of the overall puzzle. I know that that's a very simple statement. But again, if you get the running back, hopefully Rice is back and full bore next year, like he's ready to go. And then you see what Xavier Worthy did as the season continued to progress. It didn't feel like it was too long of a season for the rookie. He played really well down the stretch. And so there are pieces here to say, well, Kansas City is still going to be an explosive team, still can score. And then you've got to get a little more pass rush on the defensive side. And I think you're in pretty good space. So I can't write the Chiefs off. And it's not because they just got, beaten the Super Bowl fairly well. It's almost like saying, well, I'm not going to write the Commanders off because the Eagles wiped them too, right? It's hey, sometimes the ball doesn't bounce your way. Sometimes Patrick didn't see Cooper DeJean make the big play. And, as we were doing some uncovering, I think this is a stat we're saying, well, hopefully it's true. NFL.com said that that's the first pick 6 for somebody celebrating their birthday in the history of the NFL, which seems almost impossible to believe that. NFL research put that note out. So I'm going to trust those people that sit there and just scan through birthdays and pick 6s. Well, what a birthday present for Cooper. I mean, that is just an amazing, Saquon Barkley. It was definitely a happy birthday Eagles day yesterday.
Yeah, Barkley's got a birthday. DeJean's got a birthday. DeJean gets the pick 6. We all thought Barkley would be the MVP coming in if they won. He wasn't, but still, what a regular season he had as well. For Mahomes, and I think we do this a lot for different quarterbacks where Lamar was great, but the defense wasn't good early, or Josh Allen didn't have enough around him. We kind of make up excuses sometimes. Well, Jalen Hurts, something we really wanted to go hard after the bad throw to end Super Bowl 57. We looked like he threw it like 30 yards and looked like a duck. Oh, we don't know if he's good enough, right? There are certain quarterbacks, and maybe because, Lamar Jackson's won 2 MVPs. You get that type of, we'll give you some passes, right? But now, what about Mahomes? He was very introspective about it, that he had to be better. Is there a better version of Patrick Mahomes, or have we seen the best of it? Because I do remember Tom Brady. There was a lull briefly in his career, too, kind of post the early Super Bowls. They went a long time before winning the next batch of Super Bowls, which is bizarre. But I think people thought of it saying, maybe Brady's peaked. And then, no, he had not. Is there a better version still to come for Patrick Mahomes?
Yeah, because I think the reason why Brady doesn't have more Super Bowl rings is because the Patriots were terrible at drafting. Let's just be what it is. So they did not surround him with went for it, and they drafted players. They drafted a lot of defensive players, but when they drafted offense, it wasn't there were some guys that were good, don't get me wrong, but there's also guys that had injuries and situations that pulled them out of what they were hoping to be getting. This comes down to Brett Veach. I think Mahomes still has every bit of the talent to go back to the Super Bowl next year or in 2 years or 3 years from now. It really does come down to how well do you continue to draft. And it's such a simple statement, right? But it's so true. I mean, you look at what Howie Roseman did. We just talked about Cooper. You talk about Quinyon Mitchell and what he was able to contribute this year. He took the chance on Jalen Hurts in the second round, and it paid off. Mm-hmm. So on and so on. I think you can go on with, Cam Jurgens. He drafted him as heir apparent to Kelsey, and Kelsey kept playing. So Cam Jurgens had to play guard when everybody knew, when he gets in there at the center, he's going to be a heck of a player. It's Landon Dickerson. So it's about the draft. And to me, you're picking 31. Does that make it harder? Sure. But you picked 32 last year. You got Xavier Worthy. So he did it right. I don't want Brett Veach to go like, he's not doing a good job. He is. Offensive line's the one spot where you got to self-reflect. I think where if you're Brett Veach, you go, why am I missing an offensive line? It's not easy to sit there and say that. Everybody has weak spots at positions they draft. I mean, that's why you have a full scouting department, because some people are just better at scouting safeties. John Schneider's a really good safety and DB scout, right, for the Seattle Seahawks. You think of the years on to DBs, it seems like they've always got, Tariq Woolen and Witherspoon. Like, they've always got something. So each GM has strengths and weaknesses. But I feel confident that Brett Veach can put another team together offensively to let Patrick Mahomes. I think that team's already next year. Again, if you get the running back that I'm talking about, and you get Rice back, and then Kelsey comes back with Noah, and you turn around and you've got Xavier Worthy and another receiver in there, I feel like, hey, you're in pretty good spots to be able to run this back and be a more explosive offense this next year, kind of the one we're used to, instead of the ones just playing all these one-score games.
They're drafting in the right spot, second to last, obviously, in this coming up draft in April. So maybe look at a running back. That's normally where you try to get those guys late first round, at the end of the first round. Could be interesting if they get an explosive back there to pair with Patrick Mahomes next year. Very quickly, we talked about Mahomes being introspective. Andy Reid, of course, is always going to say the right thing, but he also kind of said, hey, this isn't by happenstance what we've done to get to 3 in a row. I know you guys think this is easy. We work hard at it. I felt like he was almost disappointed in, if it wasn't the game plan, that they just felt like, man, maybe this wasn't our best foot forward as a collective coaching staff. They don't come much better than Andy Reid. We all understand that. What do you think he says today to himself, looking back on what happened yesterday?
Well, I think you can't beat yourself up too much, right? I mean, just there were mistakes there. There was some breakdowns in protection. Patrick certainly, I think, walked into a couple sacks also. You can blame just as much the offensive line as you can. Patrick kind of stepped into some stuff. You're like, what is he doing? He's certainly feeling uncomfortable is what he felt there. You got to trust your quarterback. And, Patrick just made some bad decisions yesterday that weren't, overcomable. But when he had the pick six, it was 10-0. And you felt like, boy, the Chiefs are really playing not very good. They're playing terrible, quite frankly, in the first half. And it was only down 10 points. And then the interception happened. You're like, ooh, that's a tough one. And then they put the one more on it. And you just look at that first half and going, that's about as bad a ball as we've seen Kansas City play since Andy Reid's been there. And it's not Andy Reid's. It's just, you got to give credit to the other team. I think everybody always forgets the other team has a salary cap of over $30 million as well. What are they paid for, right? So, it's just because, the Chiefs have a bad day doesn't mean, well, the Chiefs were just off. No, the Eagles are good. They're good too. And they took advantage of the situations and made some spectacular plays and, penalty-free for the most part, where Kansas City struggled a little more in the penalty box.
Yeah, well said. When it's 40-6, it's like at one point in that fourth quarter, you just at some point have to go, they were just flat out better than us. So I'm with you. You should never count on Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes going forward in the future. Again, we're going to talk about it here with the Super Bowl odds when we come back. You got a quarterback, you got a coach like that, you got a chance, Kansas City. A lot of people would like to have the problems that you're having today. Let's talk about those odds that we do see for next year's Super Bowl next year in the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
We are back, GM Shuffle. Dave Ross, Mark Dominik here, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. And Mark, obviously, we can understand now when you win the Super Bowl, normally those books get those numbers out quickly for the next year. Who's going to win the Super Bowl in 2026? And normally, like we saw this time last year, the Chiefs went right back to being the favorite to win. And I remember thinking 365 days ago, oh, Chiefs aren't going to be back here. Wrong. They were back there. Eagles are 6-1 to repeat as Super Bowl champions. It's so bizarre because the mentality for me for the longest time was it's so hard to repeat as champion. We just don't see it very often. And then Tom Brady, kind of made it look like, yeah, you can do that. And, you go back to the Cowboys in the 90s. And so you've seen some different iterations of it, of teams that have actually repeated. And obviously Mahomes and those guys just got it done 2 of the last 3 years. Should the Eagles be the favorites over the Lions, who are 11-1, but people with short memories might not recall that the Lions were the 1 seed and the Eagles were the 2 seed going into this postseason. But because it was so dominant, Mark, I guess that's why the market is being set at Philly 6-1. You're seeing 10-1s out there. I found an 11-1 on the Lions, but really 6 to 10-1 in that range for Philly over Detroit.
Yeah, you know what? They talk about their own destiny. Philly, if they do go back to the Super Bowl, that means they win 3 of the last 4 Super Bowls. That's kind of destiny. You start to think about, like, if next year the Eagles go, that means they've been to as many Super Bowls the last 4 years as the Chiefs have, right? And so it's like, wait a second, maybe you're not realizing that 2 out of the last 3 years the Eagles have been. So, I mean, I kind of get the line where it is. I mean, I know it's a big number. I know Saquon Barkley made it through an entire season 100% healthy, which was a huge piece of this entire puzzle. But I think the confidence having Jalen Hurts and what they're doing offensively, defensively, knowing Vic Fangio is going to be back again for another year. Obviously, they're going to get another play caller in there, but they certainly have an identity right now that they can really follow through and be part of. And so I get the number why they're over Detroit, because they've been there, done that. And that deserves some level of recognition. And even where they had the crash and burn a year ago still put a lot of wins on the board. So this is a team that you realize, even in, with the Commanders, the Cowboys, we'll see where the Giants go. It's a tough East to get through. Hard not to imagine them in the postseason. Once you punch that ticket, clearly what they did this last postseason, they played well enough to, work their way through a couple tough games.
You hit on something there that people normally don't take into account when you look at these things for the following year, and that is the coordinator changes, right? And so that we know that the Lions are going to have 2 new coordinators, with Aaron Glenn taking over as the Jets head coach, and obviously Ben Johnson taking over in Chicago. We're assuming, and I know what they teach as a kid when you assume, Kellen Moore is going to become the new head coach of the Saints. We were kidding about it with Rich Gannon on VSiN. Obviously he won an NFL MVP. He's like, hey, the 3 of us could call plays for the Eagles next year. Give it to 26, throw it to 11. You got 88. You're going to be okay. Is it going to be okay? Because we saw it didn't look great after Super Bowl 57. And Steichen went on to be the head coach of the Colts, and that offense looked differently. And obviously we saw Gannon go on to be the head coach of the Cardinals, and that defense looked different. And now you got Fangio and Moore, at least temporarily. We don't expect Vic to go anywhere. How important is that coordinator relationship here with these players to get the most as Philadelphia did this year?
Yeah, I think it's obviously critically important. You've got to have somebody that the players have confidence in, that can motivate a room when he talks to them, that kind of has a way to communicate with the different personalities throughout the entire organization, because there are so many different personalities. That's what makes football special. Brings people together that maybe never would have met each other in their entire life, but because they can play this game, then they become brothers in the locker room and hang out and just really enjoy each other's company. And I think that's awesome, but I think that's where the coordinator really has to be able to put that blend together. But he's also, it's not just the coordinator. It is his staff or her staff one day. It's the staff that's going to be like, who is the offensive line coach? What a critical hire that is. Who is the tight end? A very critical hire that I think sometimes we just take for granted. It's like, he coaches the tight ends. No big deal. It's a big deal. It is. Who can handle a wide receiver room with all those divas in there? Well, it's a hard job. People don't realize these jobs, when you're a position coach, you're not just a position coach. it is tough to coach these guys because they're used to being the best. They realize there's another depth chart they're battling through. And if they don't feel like they're getting better, they're looking at you going, why am I even listening to this dude? Right? They're like, what are we doing here? I just got own. And so it's not just the coordinator for the Eagles when they assume that they lose Kellen Moore. It's going to be, where do they take from maybe internally from their staff, but then who do they replace that person with? All those things are huge. And it isn't a rush. You don't rush these things. You try not to. You make sure you take your time and get the right people in the building, because I've been part of a staff where, we got the wrong people in. And we had to make changes. And it was very difficult, very uncomfortable, very difficult, put a lot of stress on us.
Fascinating. Those are the things people don't think about. And again, I'm looking at those Lions at 10-1, and I think it's very, very playable. But, Dan Campbell, you got to get the right guys in there. If you're going from within, make sure those guys can get the most, as Ben Johnson did out of Jared Goff, as we just saw with Kellen Moore and Jalen Hurts, to get the most out of those guys. So big challenges there. AFC, we got a three-way race there. Chiefs 7-1, Bills 7-1, Ravens 7-1. Shows you that at least in the marketplace, Mark, that they look at those three teams and say, the reason why we trust all those guys, it's Mahomes, it's Kamar, it's Josh. Good luck. Then I look in the periphery, and I see Joe Burrow 20-1 for the Bengals to win the Super Bowl. And my eyes light up, and I go, wait a minute. Can I put Joey B right in there with the other three that I mentioned? I mean, you are running the gauntlet in the AFC to get through these quarterbacks, the talent that they have right now. It's kind of ridiculous.
Right, when you start to think about some of the other quarterbacks we're not talking about, right? The Justin Herberts, the C.J. Strouds of the world that are putting up pretty good numbers. I mean, we've got Bo Nix, who came in and played well with his rookie campaign. So there's a lot of battles going on, obviously, in the AFC to kind of get through this one. I like your thinking, though. Joe Burrow, I think that number's up there because no one knows exactly how this offseason is going to play out for him. It's not that they don't have the talent to get there, especially Joe Burrow certainly can get this team back in the postseason. It's hard not to think that. It's more is T. Higgins going to be part of the squad? I think if they can pull T. Higgins back, and there seems to be good whispers at least of that happening, I think this number drops quickly. I think it comes down to 16, 14 maybe, because now you're sitting there going, wait, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins running it back again, another draft. Hopefully you can figure out how to, really take care of Hendrickson so he doesn't come back to the table again, because he keeps outperforming every contract, which is great. You're just worried what year is he not. But still, happy for Trey, and it's amazing that, New Orleans right now is going, how did we let him out the door? Anyway, I've been there too, so let me just take a step back on that. But I think that number's low because I think people are wondering if T. Higgins is going to stay around, and I think that's the big piece. And so, if you're in DraftKings and you're looking at this, I like to play early because, again, the whispers you hear, even at the Super Bowl, where T. Higgins wants to stay. Like, he's going to have this pick of the litter, and he can go anywhere, but he really wants to stay because I think he knows what he's got in quarterback. And, you can go to another team and say, well, I like it, but, maybe it's not Joe Burrow, but maybe, I'm going to cash in $4 more million a year, $5 million more a year. Great. But we're losing. And we've got an average quarterback, and, I don't know if we can get over the hump. So, this is going to be very interesting to watch. So I like that one when you think about these numbers.
Am I misguided in that belief that kind of talking about running the gauntlet next year when you look at these numbers associated with the AFC, that we assume, you're right, the Chargers are going to push the Chiefs, I think, a little bit more. Denver also was a playoff team a year ago. So you got three teams in that division that feel like they're just getting better, and I'm sure the Chiefs will get better too. We know how tough the North is, right? Steelers are a playoff team. Ravens are a playoff team. The Bengals are the best playoff team that didn't make the playoffs last year. And then the East with Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills, they feel like they're running that thing. But we all thought last year maybe the Jets and Dolphins could be on par with them. They clearly were not. In the NFC, there does feel like there's more of that demarcation line, right? That clearly Philadelphia right now with Detroit. Detroit was the 1 seed, Philly the 2, but Philly's the world champs now. And then San Francisco was all banged up. And the Rams are good, and the Packers are good. But, man, it feels like there's more elite quarterback talent in the AFC than there is in the NFC. Is that fair, or is that a little bit skewed?
No, I think that's fair. I do. I think that's kind of a fair assessment. I think that's the way you look at it. You do feel like when you get into the big four in the AFC, you talk about those guys, Lamar, Josh, Patrick, certainly Joe Burrow. That's, you try to take the best four out of the NFC, and Jalen Hurts has said, I'm part of that conversation now, and I think rightfully so. Can Jordan Love say he's part of that conversation? Or can Jared Goff? I mean, when you read the names, you say that, those are good players, right? Whether it's trying to think who the other quarterback, Brock Purdy, or maybe it's your guy, Dak Prescott. But, when you get the four names and then you try to bring up the four best in the NFC, it just feels like it's like, I'll take the AFC 4, please. I think that's very fair. But I think that means the NFC is a lot more open, meaning that you can have the Jaden Daniels of the world come in one season and suddenly, boom, you're in the NFC Championship game because, he might be one of the guys that are part of that big four in the NFC going forward next year. The team I like there is the 49ers, though. I feel like they were so much injuries, so many situations. I just feel like they're going to be a team that's going to be a lot better in 2025 than in 2024. I know they're going to have little changes to the roster. We all do. You never get the same 53 as we always talk about. It's always a different group of guys. But I think the 49ers, to me, if you're playing the not the obvious, the Philadelphia Eagles or the Detroit Lions, I like the 49ers where you're getting them in this kind of a bid.
16-1, you can see out there in the marketplace for the Niners. Yeah, I think we might have forgotten about them with all their injuries, too. That's going to make what Detroit did with all their defensive injuries even more impressive to still lock down that one seed. I know they're disappointed in Detroit that they lost their first-round playoff game against Commanders, but still, sometimes those injuries are things you cannot control. It does get down to that a little bit, doesn't it, Mark? Sometimes the healthiest teams are the ones that end up in the Super Bowl, and really nobody was healthier than the Chiefs, at least the AFC side, at the end of the year.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It comes down to that. And think about the Eagles, right? At the end of the season, they're like, Jalen Hurts is banged up. Landon Dickerson. Cam Jurgens back. And they all came back, right? And so it's so huge. I mean, any pieces of those not on that field, and I think things could be a little different than what it was, certainly at the quarterback position. That's obvious. But, health is a huge part of it. It certainly made it tough for Detroit to get to what they did was impressive. But, you got to get through that card. You got to get through the gauntlet. Get at least as much as your team as you can to the end and see if you can do it. Both teams came in healthy, but obviously the Eagles came in just driven and determined.
Like my mom says, if you got your health, you got everything. That's for sure. Eagles luckily had enough health to get through there and become Super Bowl champs. All right, when we come back, how about new quarterbacks in new places? We'll try to play that association game. That's next here on the GM Show.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
We are back at the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross and Mark Dominik here with you. And while Super Bowl Sunday was getting all the attention, Mark, there were some news items that came out that had nothing to do with the Eagles or the Chiefs. One of them rather significant at the quarterback position in New York, New Jersey. What exit? Aaron Rodgers. We got a new regime in New York with the JTS Jets, and maybe your services are no longer required to take flight. Now, he's only been there 2 years, and I think he's gotten the message loud and clear that those 2 years in New York are up. It was really 1 year because the first year he got the Achilles, at third snap of the season, he was done for the year. So really it was a 1 year look in New York, and it didn't look great if we're all being honest. What do you make of that you're telling Aaron on Super Bowl Sunday, hey, we want you to prepare because we're preparing for life without you with the Jets?
Yeah, I don't think I'm surprised that we got the answer this quickly. I kind of always said when the Jets hire whoever they get, that you're going to get to Aaron Rodgers and make a determination. You probably, by getting the job, you've already told ownership what you're going to do with Aaron Rodgers, right? I mean, that's if Woody Johnson wasn't asking what's your plan with Aaron Rodgers, and you're like, I don't know, I haven't figured it out yet, you're probably not going to get the job, right? So, this is one of those ones where I think they were just trying to be respectful for Aaron, bring him in, tell him, hey, look, we're going to go in a different direction. Aaron's used to it. I mean, I'm waiting for Jordan Love to join the Jets one day. I guess is that how this works? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe next GM is that the Jets just maybe don't go down that path. I don't know. But you sit here and you say, where does Aaron Rodgers go? What happens next, right? So the nice thing I think for Aaron is that he played well toward down the stretch. I thought he was playing his best football actually of the season. So that's encouraging. And in the fact that I think he still wants to play, there's going to be enough seats at the table. We've got some quarterbacks in this draft class, 3 or 4, I think, like we talked about on VSiN by the books earlier today. That was talking through, who might be the third or fourth quarterback in this draft class. But then when you sit around and you look and say the Jets need a quarterback, the Giants need a quarterback, the Titans need a quarterback, the Raiders need a quarterback. I mean, you can keep going through. You can also grab teams like, does Seattle stay with Geno Smith for another season, or do they want a quarterback? So there's a lot of those kind of situations as well when you kind of look at the draft in general. And so there's going to be a home for Aaron Rodgers. Obviously the debate is, where does it make sense? If we're asking, I think the Titans can make sense, right? Because I think that they could. And maybe we don't love one of these quarterbacks enough, and we'll take the defensive lineman. I could see them like, hey, let's get a bridge here. Let's have some success in Nashville. Let's get things going a little bit better, and see if we can get this thing kind of turned around a little bit with Aaron under a Callahan offense. I think that's a possibility. You know me, I've been the one that's kind of spread the Rams whispers.
Yeah,
depending on what happens with Matt Stafford, assuming that because Matt Stafford's not going to play for that salary. I just don't think he'll play. And so now if the Rams can't figure out what's that contract look like, they got that guy Aaron Rodgers over there. We could try him for a year or two and see what happens and keep this thing going. And so I think that's a sleeper landing spot for Aaron Rodgers. But I do think Aaron Rodgers starting quarterback in 2025 in the National Football League.
Well, I mean, Rodgers in LA just seems like it makes sense. I don't know why. It just feels like it would work with Sean McVay and Tinseltown, the whole bit. Rodgers goes there. In Tennessee, with Brian Callahan, you're going to go into your second year as a head coach there in Nashville. How does that work? Because does that work with a younger head coach and an established Hall of Fame quarterback to be an Aaron Rodgers? Could that match work because it is kind of a guy that's still new and learning on the job, which is a guy in a quarterback who's seen everything at the quarterback position? Could that work because of those two reasons?
Yeah, and you got to remind yourself, even though it didn't work out, Aaron really liked Nate Hackett, who was a younger person also, not but around that same age, that age group. Look, Aaron just wants somebody, in my gut opinion, that understands ball and could put you in position to go win and let him have some, flexibility at the line of scrimmage. But you got to think, Callahan's dad is got to be a driving force also. When you think about what his impact would be and his success that he's had, with Rich Gannon and other quarterbacks that he's been around, and just to protect the quarterback and how great he is at that. It would allow the Titans to kind of, use that pick for something else. It allows Will Levis to kind of maybe sit back and be like, oh, okay, now I got to watch Aaron Rodgers play, but maybe that may help Will Levis a little bit. I mean, doesn't mean you give up on Will Levis, but you can't do nothing at the position. There's no way the Titans do that. So it's one of these ones where I think the neat thing is I think we'll get some answers sooner than later, but we're a month away from those answers. I think, as we got to get to free agency pretty soon. I can't believe it though. It's, we're almost at the middle of February somehow already. I mean, this is good. It's good. But I mean, I think that's how it could work there because I think that, again, it's about, Aaron feeling wanted and needed and believed in more than anything.
When I think of Bill Callahan, the dad, I think, one of the best offensive line coaches the league's ever seen. And that if you're a quarterback, that means something to you, right? Like, hey, especially my advancing age, you're going to protect me. You got Bill, you got dad on the staff. Yeah, that could work. I could see that scenario there too. We also got some news on Super Sunday that Deebo wants out again. Didn't we just go through this 365 days ago in San Francisco? Or he's trade me to the East Coast. I know he had some family issues and he wanted to get back in the East Coast. That didn't work out. It was, I don't know if it was acrimonious for a time with John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, but it felt like it from the outside looking in. Is this a carryover of that from a year ago? And then he had one of his worst statistical years that we've seen in San Francisco. And the Niners, to that point, Mark said, okay, if you want to go ahead with your agent and figure out a trade, we'll let you explore. What does that mean when a front office says, yes, even though you're under contract with us, we will let you try to figure out a landing spot? What does that even look like?
Yeah, so this has a lot of levels to it, but the biggest one is San Francisco's completely comfortable letting the league. And although Deebo's been a big part of their offense and part of their team and was a really good draft choice, I think that this might be a Lynch, a Shanahan. Like let's move on. Brandon Ayuk stepped up. I know. Let's move on. But I think the bigger hidden piece here is Ricky Pearsall is better than I think people realize, and I think the know that. And, I know Ricky Pearsall had a couple nice games at the end of the season, but I think they see him as a much better player than maybe the casual fan sees Ricky Pearsall because of, this unfortunate shooting before the season and just, having to come back from that. But I think it speaks more volumes to Ricky Pearsall than it does anything else. And so, I'm giving up the inside fantasy football trade right now in February, whatever it is. It's a little early for the draft for those fantasy football. No, but I just it screams that, and also screams that this is a team that's about to sign Brock Purdy, and it's going to need some salary cap space. And so, how many people can you keep? And so, having paid Brandon Ayuk, knowing you've got McCaffrey, you want Ricky Pearsall to step up, but you might want to take some money off the table too. So, I think this was very amicable, and I have a feeling also locker room wise, maybe just hasn't been a happy fit, and it's just been something Coach Shanahan's been like, you know what, it's just not worth it. Let's move on. Let's make sure we get our quarterback, because I think that's the focus of this football team this offseason.
So when you see that, and again, I look at Deebo and I think physicality from a wide receiver, almost like a glorified running back / wide receiver. But as a wide receiver, while he made plays, and it wasn't like you looked at him as a true number one wide receiver, like a pure wide receiver, I guess is what I'm getting at. He's almost that hybrid role. Is that the problem? If there's a problem with Deebo, because he's a very, very good player in the league, nobody's denouncing that. But because he's not a true, let's say, like Amari Cooper, I think of Amari as a great route runner. Like, where he's going to be, and that's where he's going to be. But that's not what I think of when I think of Deebo. Because he's that hybrid, does it make him more of a tough physical fit in your offense sometimes?
Yes, somewhat, Dave. I think the bigger underlying factor is what the next club who acquires Deebo Samuel has to do is, can he stay healthy? That's the big question with Deebo. Been a lot of injuries through this career. Some were minor, some were a little bit bigger, but that's a body that I'm worried if I'm a GM and I'm watching Deebo Samuel and I'm thinking about this, I am going to have to rely on my training medical staff, my orthopedic doctors to tell me what's left in the tank, how many games can I get? Because I do worry that's a real problem for Deebo. It's not his brain, it's not his desire, it's something he can control, and that's his body in terms of breaking down. And so I think that's a big part of this as well, is move him, what the proverbial 1 year too early rather than 1 year too late.
Yep. Very quickly, speaking of moving, we're assuming now, and as you and I have this conversation here on a Monday morning, maybe it'll get done with Kellen Moore and he'll become the new head coach of the Saints. It's the last vacancy yet to be occupied. Why would there be the delay? I almost expected it last night, Mark. And I know that Serianni is making a pledge. He curses. I'm not going to curse. Let's run this thing back here. Is there any chance that he goes, you know what? Maybe Ben Johnson going back one more year in Detroit didn't hurt his stock at all. Maybe I should stay one more year, run this thing back as a coordinator. Or do you really think it's all kind of the tea leaves? We're reading those. That's why the Saints were waiting. Where it was for the Super Bowl to end. Now that it's over, do we expect this to happen in the next 24, 48 hours?
So, two things, because it's a great question. Number one, could be that because of Kellen Moore's performance, that the number needed to go up another $1 million or $2 million per year. Could be that simple. Where you haven't got the deal done, but because of where we're sitting, we no longer want this number because Chip Kelly came in at this number. So it could be in that realm. That's a real possibility. The other one is I have been there. I have been at the altar with the head coach, and he said no. And we toasted and celebrated. He said yes, and he said no. So he changed his mind in the middle of the night when I got a 2 a.m. phone call. So I've been there before. It said yes, and then it turned around, and it was a no, and we moved to a different direction. So I've lived that personally as a GM. It's not easy. It's a quick pivot. And so, I think we'll hear Kellen Moore. I truly believe we will. But your point, is it's not a bad job to be in. And could Howie Roseman be offering the Chip Kelly extension? Hey, look, we'll keep you here for 6 a year, 5 a year, somewhere in that range, and you can just kind of have more of a pick of the litter next year instead of going to a Saints team that's struggling with the salary cap. So I think we'll read it. But it's going to have to happen the next 24 hours. If you see it by 24 hours. Then things are starting to get muddy for New Orleans.
Fascinating. I can't, maybe off air, I got to figure out who the coach was that stood you up, Mark. That's not cool. But yeah, things change, right? 24 hours later, he looks differently. Say again?
Might have been 2 coaches that year.
Okay, that's his league. We might need you to author a book on that one. That sounds like something that people might want to know. Mark, great stuff as always, my friend. We'll do it again next week on GM Shuffle.
You bet, buddy. Good to see you.
Always good. Thanks for everybody listening here. Part of DraftKings and VSiN. We will see you this time next week on the GM Shuffle.